Hi there, and welcome to the last painter's vlog of 2021. To be honest, I've been putting making this video off for a few days now because it seemed very overwhelming. It was originally just going to be a recap of 2021 video, but in order to understand why I'm even where I'm at right now in my life, I needed to dive back into the beginning of 2020, or as we know it, the beginning of a new era in which the dreaded virus altered our entire realities. Put euphemistically, my life was thrown into a tailspin and the path I was on changed irrevocably. So what exactly happened? Going back to late 2019, my partner Blair and I were planning for the biggest move of our lives. We had spent an entire year planning to move 8,625 miles away from Brooklyn, New York to Siem Reap, Cambodia, indefinitely. While we did sublet our apartment in Brooklyn for an extended period, our plan was to put roots into this country that I'd fallen in love with since 2015. While Blair was mostly looking to try out another location after grinding in New York for 15 years, I don't think he quite expected to move so far. It was really my profound love for Cambodia that began with a short trip in 2015. Over the years since that first initial trip, the magical city of Siem Reap began appearing relentlessly in my meditations. Basically to the point where I could no longer ignore the power of this vision of moving overseas to what I still consider a spiritual place that strangely feels so much like home. We held a huge porch sale in Brooklyn, selling most of our belongings to the thirsty locals who literally showed up before our start time at around 8:45 in the morning and packed for what we thought would be a totally fresh start in a sunlight dream. Upon arriving in Siem Reap, the smoky haze scent hit me in the face, and I honestly can't remember feeling more alive or happier than in those 2 months. We worked with a friend and local realtor Cho to find our perfect starter apartment. We ended up choosing a behemoth of an apartment with a porch bigger than our Brooklyn bedroom. It was a laborious 4 stars up, but oh my God, I am being totally real with you that the day we moved into that empty apartment was the happiest day of my life to date. It was more than an apartment. It was the miracle of realizing a dream and trusting in my deepest intuition. The hot, dusty streets, the golden light, smells, and sounds filled my very being to the core. I was home. After setting up our apartment, mostly buying secondhand dishware, lamps, and other assorted necessities from the local thrift shop Sakura, as well as new goods from the old market, it was really starting to feel like home. We strung what seemed like 1,000 lights on the porch. It was pretty hilarious. Bought new bedding and found several plants. We even had a housewarming inviting our close friends in town. I began to interview with the local Interfitness gym, and I basically met all the staff there, and I was actually set to start a job upon my return from India. It was always the plan that I decided to head to Dharamshala, India to receive my yoga certification in order to broaden my areas of fitness expertise. I picked up a couple private clients and even landed a $2,000 commission with a German hotel owner. A path felt like it was beginning to be set. On March 1st, I said goodbye to Blair and was actually quite sad to leave Siem Reap, albeit only for a month. I boarded the plane, and in hindsight, it feels like this was one of those pivotal moments that sets a totally different trajectory than what was expected. This was precisely when COVID was spreading its horrific grip slowly over the globe. I basically had high hopes it would be a passing thing. In India, my mind was blown away. I began a spiritual journey to depths I had not yet known. We practiced meditation, yoga, pranayama, and learned yogic philosophy. I developed deep friendships with the classgoers and felt what I can only describe as an awakening in my spirit. I had really only gone to broaden my physical learning, yet uncovered facets that were rooted deep in my being. Perhaps aspects I had not yet explored, as well as areas that I needed to deal with in my personal life. On a daily basis, memories floated into my consciousness through extended meditations. Thoughts, sounds, smells I hadn't thought of in years. Something within me was cracking wide open. During this time, the world was experiencing its own transformation, and not particularly for the best. As the numbers of virus cases rose, the headmaster, teachers, and of course all of the students at the yoga school became increasingly anxious as countries began to shut their borders. One of these countries was Cambodia. They shut their borders to any U.S. citizens, even if I hadn't stepped foot in the U.S. since early January. We ended our yogic studies early, and a deep confusion washed over me. What the hell do I do? This place I had just moved to and invested in, this new life, was no longer an option to me. Even speaking of it now, nearly 2 years later, feels extremely painful. A dream not fully realized. A passionate decision cut short. I felt out of control. A couple friends and I from the school decided to try fleeing India on the last day flights were operating, as very abruptly the government announced they would shut all flights down, going out and coming in. In fact, the whole country was headed straight into a wild lockdown. We caught the last flight out of Dharamshala, but when I reached Delhi, my flight to Dubai, then Russia, and connecting to Chicago wasn't feasible because it wasn't all one direct flight. It seems silly, but everything was a fucking mess to say the least. I was stuck in Delhi with my 2 American friends for 10 days, and the situation began to feel pretty dire. I felt my options had run dry. I tried thinking of every possible angle. What about heading to Bangkok or a remote area of Thailand to wait until Cambodia's borders reopened? It seemed like all doors were beginning to close except to head back to my homeland, USA, which is not what I wanted to do. I signed up for an evacuation flight through the US Embassy and patiently waited. My friends and I, the only people stuck in a 4-story hotel, practiced yoga, meditated, and waited to hear word. Shockingly, I opened up my email one morning to see an email from the embassy that felt cryptic. Quote, "Come to the embassy tomorrow for your evacuation flight," unquote, or something to that effect. The next challenge was getting there, as my ride, a friend I had met through the whole ordeal, got stopped by the police on the way to pick me up. I pleaded with the kind hotel owner to take me to the embassy, nearly in tears. His wife actually ended up taking me. To this day, I think, how can I ever repay this kindness? The hotel owner even told us we could stay at his hotel for free if we ran out of money. I relied on their kindness to get me through this extremely unknown ordeal. When I arrived at the embassy, I realized it was the Mormons who were flying me home for absolutely free. They were pulling out their young missionaries and flying them back to Salt Lake City due to the oncoming pandemic. I remember talking to one of them, and he was super bummed because he was leaving just a few months earlier after a 2-year stint in Delhi. I was jealous, as my time there was a meager 3 weeks, and here I was on an evac flight home. Prayers were said on the plane, and when we landed in SLC, the only place I knew to go was Kalamazoo, Michigan, where my sister and her family live, quarantined and waited out. Meanwhile, Blair was still in Siem Reap, confused as ever with what to do. Confusion swirled in the air, and there were so many aspects of my life that seemed suspended in time. I couldn't even head back to Brooklyn as we were still subletting our room there. But worse yet, New York was the epicenter of the pandemic. I quarantined and folded into my sister's family, where I continued to practice yoga every day. To make everything seem far more murky, Blair and I were also going through some personal issues in our relationship, and the uncertainty took out any footing from under me. The only grounding I felt at that time was my family and the yogic practice. One night I lay in bed, wide-eyed, and I felt a deep pain in my chest. Tears began forming in my eyes, and before I knew it, I was sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. I had never felt a pain like that. Not from any death, not from any breakup. I thought of the Cambodian sunlight enveloping me. I thought of the new apartment that I would never see again. I think a huge part of me felt that the world would never, ever, ever be the same. And looking back now, I was right. I called Blair and we both agreed it was time for him to buy a ticket and try to get home. We hadn't seen each other in nearly 3 months. At the root of everything, we are best friends, and we needed to be together during this time. Miraculously, he did find a flight home from Phnom Penh, albeit a very costly one. He was just as confused as I with the state of the world and our relationship, but after he quarantined, we reconvened and bit by bit regained our trust in the union. We decided to buy a van of some sort, as not only a way to get around, but as a means to travel by land due to air travel being so iffy. Basically, kind of as a joke, a friend in Kalamazoo sent me a link to a van called the Jambulance at a unique car dealership in Grand Rapids. It stuck in my mind and I thought, why not? Let's go check this thing out. It was loud and felt a bit risky, being a 95 diesel with 150,000 miles on her. But once again, my intuition, or insanity, Felt like this was the one. We drove up there with my sister's car and the dealer gave us $1,000 off the asking price. We went to the bank, paid in cash, and felt a crazy exhilaration at the purchase. That night, in sheer elation, we threw back beers and watched the sunset in near disbelief at what we'd done. At the very least, the van could be a roof over our heads and something we could pour our hearts and souls collectively into in what seemed like such a collectively sad, chaotic time in the world. Buildings were burning, and the Black Lives Matters movement was thankfully stronger and more fervent than ever. It seemed like shootings and viral deaths became a shroud. We had to remain strong and continue with art making, whatever that looked like. I painted an entire series surrounding these COVID times, acting almost as a reporter with what I was witnessing. The world marched for human rights, and makeshift graveyards were created for the increasing dead. It felt and still feels like total madness, the era of another plague that perhaps we as humans felt we had outsmarted in the past. Here, nature was again, and we were at her mercy. We spent months researching, ordering parts, and preparing for the insanely huge task of a van build-out. We would order one part, then realize we needed something else. It felt like a mountain. That summer, we poured our emotions into the van and took a brief visit to my parents, where another pivotal moment came about. While baling hay at my aunt's house, a little tiny orange angel of a kitten walked out from the haystacks in the barn. Blair called my attention to it, saying, "Jules, you won't believe this." I took one look and my heart cracked. Then my aunt said, "Yes, that kitten's mother just abandoned her a few days ago. She's as good as gone." I honestly couldn't bear the thought, even though it felt like there was absolutely no room for a living presence in our lives. We were trying as best we could to watch after ourselves, and we were also preparing for a cross-country road trip in the van come fall. But my conscience got the best of me. We scooped up the 2-week-old kitten, whose eyes weren't even open yet, and began nursing her with the tiniest bottle I'd ever seen. To our surprise, and my father, who claimed there was no way we could keep that kitten alive, she continued to grow stronger and healthier. Her blue eyes popped open and her belly was round. We bottle fed her for over a month. By this time, both Blair and I were far too gone to give her up for adoption. The thought of it actually made me queasy. We now had a new member of the pack, and her name was Butterball. After months at my sister's, we decided to embark on the van build-out upstate New York at Blair's folks' house in Burlingame. The world felt even more unsettled as the 2020 election loomed, and all of our eyes were glued to the television. The van build felt endless, and our expected finish date of early October bled into November and cold rains fell. We spent thousands of dollars on van repairs as well as the build-out. Honestly, during this time, I'll be real, it was very hard to keep it together. The days seemed to blend together, and even though I tried my best to meditate and practice yoga, a malaise set in. I fell into a mediocre, low-grade depression for a couple months. We had also decided to officially move out of our Brooklyn digs for the time being, as our not-so-cool landlords had raised rent another $200 during the darkest of times. The move was very bittersweet, and we also closed up Blair's wood shop in Brooklyn. Leaving the city felt like closing yet another chapter, perhaps not one quite finished. Tears rolled down my cheeks as we headed out of the city with our belongings. Finally, the van was finished in early November, and Blair and I couldn't have been happier. I have to give it to the amazing craftsmanship that Blair embodies. His skilled touch made the van possible. I was there simply as his assistant and to create those final soft touches, such as homemade window coverings and arranging all the decorative elements. I learned a ton. We both agree it would be a long time, if ever, that we'd ever embark on a van build again. November 4th, we set out on the long journey west in pursuit of adventure and warmer weather. We made a quick stop in Baltimore to see my friend Emmy, and then the wide open road greeted us. My spirits finally began to pick up again, as I started to feel that wild sense of travel and liberation once more. Neither of us had ever tried our hand at van life. Over the next 5 months, we saw the U.S. through a different lens. We celebrated Thanksgiving in the woods of Tennessee with my best friend, camped near hot springs in Arkansas, sped down Route 66, and witnessed stunning sunsets and sweeping vistas. The evil Walmart became a regular destination for us for cheaper necessities, and we were constantly on the hunt for firewood. We spent 2 months in Fort Collins with one of my close friends, Lucy, and her family, where Blair took work building a gorgeous A-frame clubhouse for my goddaughter. There we spent Christmas together as our family celebration was canceled. We hit up Santa Fe, Albuquerque, and Taos. We headed to California, basking in the sunshine finally. LA, the Salton Sea, Slab City, Death Valley, Joshua Tree, and finally the Redwoods in Northern California. In some of these places, we had such fortitudinous and divine encounters with other travelers that we couldn't help but believe in the universe. On some nights, we felt that we'd reached some of the farthest corners of the world. Alone, free, and exploring places that not many see. Those moments will remain etched in my being forever. We continued northward, celebrating my 39th birthday in Redding, California, before heading to Eugene, Oregon to spend time with close friends for a week. We then hit Portland, Montana, and South Dakota. The trek home was accompanied with gray skies and pounding rain along Highway 90. It felt like the weather was speaking to how our bodies and bones felt. Cold, tired, and ready to rest our heads for a long time. Life on the road was exhilarating, but also a perpetual game of getting supplies, sussing out cheap campsites, building fires, setting up, breaking down. And our van isn't exactly a friend of my 5 foot 10 inches frame. I crouched a lot, ultimately hurting my lower back in Oregon. So when we arrived this April in Kalamazoo to once again reconvene at my sister's abode, we were beat, and that is an understatement. On the last legs of the road, Blair and I had decided to spend a year in one place, and when we rolled into Kalamazoo, we thought, this is as good a place as any for now, while the world settles down. We hunted for apartments and found a kind landlord who owns 12 properties in town. We immediately connected with his personality, and he had just renovated the apartment we now live in. Although we felt pretty hesitant signing a year-long lease, there's always an option to sublet, and finding a place during the pandemic proved to be quite difficult coordinating, even in a college town in western Michigan. We moved into the sun-filled apartment in May of this year. I spent the summer creating artworks outside of my comfort zone, feeling yet another shift in myself. I wanted to continue the path of honoring my intuition, and I became interested in rug making. I had a vision while meditating of what has become one of my most pivotal works to date. A naked rainbow body floating in a painstaking punch needle field of daisies. Also, through an arduous and extensive application process, I was accepted into my first art fair in New York in September, Spring Break Art Show, where I tried my hand at curating an exhibition for the first time in my life. I also exhibited 6 new works from the past year, and it felt like a very pivotal time in my career. The reaction to the new piece astounded me. I couldn't believe it, and it really made me realize that intuition trumps everything. Being in New York invigorated me. For a long time, years actually, New York City was my everything, my pinnacle, where I wanted to be and stay forever. This arose in me from a very young age from a family trip to the city. Coming from a rural background, the city presented to me, well, everything and anything an artist could want. Being the youngest in my family, and I guess you could say a black sheep of sorts, or maybe alien is the better term, I always felt like I fit in New York. This was my tribe. Being back there this past September for 3 weeks reminded me of my perpetual love. Honestly, Kalamazoo's temporary. It always was. This is my college town, and frankly, when I left in 2008, I vowed never to return. And yet here I am due to circumstances of the universe. I'll be real. It feels weird. The past few months after I turned from New York have been a near blur. I haven't experienced this much routine in years. I landed a job leading 4 classes at the local YMCA, 2 classes at Down Dog Yoga Center, which, side note, is awesome because it's my first time leading yoga classes, and 2 private clients who I see once a week. In the effort to rebuild my blown-through nest egg that was meant for Cambodia, I also picked up 2 days a week helping in my sister's invitation shop in a nearby town. Needless to say, my schedule is packed, and while I thought this would keep me occupied to a degree, I have to be frank, it hasn't been easy. Much of 2021 for me, even though parts of it have felt liberating and adventurous, has seemed to have had a slight film over it. Like when your car windshield fogs up, or you've been smoking weed for days on end. There is a haze built up in my mind. My meditation practice has fallen somewhat to the wayside with the busyness of my schedule. I know, I haven't made appropriate time for it. And in the past 2 months, shockingly, I haven't painted a thing. Not one picture. Okay, maybe a couple small pieces, but this has not happened in the past decade of being a painter. I wake up some mornings with a twinge of confusion and sadness. I've talked to others about this, and they express a lot of the same sentiments regarding 2021. I wish I could say, hey, this has been the greatest year of my life. But while I'm positively filled with gratitude for the health of my family and friends, having a roof over my head, an amazing partner who loves me unconditionally, a little orange butterball who loves me most of the time, I think, and even having created some of the greatest artworks of my lifetime this year, something is missing. And I don't know what it is or how to necessarily get it back, because the world will never be the same. And perhaps it's not a matter of getting anything back, but a lot of me feels like I lost something within myself. The collective consciousness has partly fallen ill, but I do believe it is through this darkness that an awakening will occur. I intuitively feel myself edging closer and closer to a succinct truth of transformation. A yearning is swelling inside of me, its edges becoming more clear, the murkiness giving way to something on the horizon. It's been a really hard year. It's been a really great year, and I'm really, really, really ready for 2022. This time, I think more than other years in the past, I am perceiving this new year as just that, a new fucking year. I think overall the past 2 years have armored us to be ready for anything at any time. It has been through pain, loss, destruction, and fire that all of our social constructs and what we perceived as reality have burned down to ash. Not to be flighty as hell, but also to be flighty as hell, we must all become the phoenix and decide what our burning truth is. Everything has reduced us to rubble, and the only thing that remains is our individual truth. I am seeing it now so much around me that everyone appears to be rubbing their eyes and looking around at the new world order, realizing that none of the old ways work any longer. So, with all this being said, 2022, damn it, I am really ready for you. So, that's what's happened in the last 2 years. I'm signing off and letting go of this year. I usually wouldn't say this, but I'm glad to see her go. Thank you for continuing with me on this insane journey, and I'll see you in the next one.